Right. So up to this point, we've been working with Jenkins files that you just copy and paste into the configuration of Jenkins. More realistically, you would be working with Jenkins files that is part of the source code of a repository where you have your Java or your React or your Angular or wherever you're hosting your particular stack, and then we can configure Jenkins to go and fetch the Jenkins file from source control and then run it right from there, right? So that instead of you configuring it in the UI, right? The life cycle looks something like this. You have two folks, two developers that are interacting, Alice and Bob, where Alice is she's done with one of the feature set, and she's ready. She's tested locally. She's making sure that the build doesn't break. She has merged master into her feature branch, and it's up to date. She's up to date, right? And she's running the test against it, and she's fairly confident that this will not break the build. And once she's confident, she pushes to a remote feature branch and creates a PR and assigns it to Bob to do a code review. Perhaps they even met, and she demos the feature for him. And Bob, checks. Maybe Bob is not quite convinced, and maybe Bob even checks out her code, merges it into his feature branch, and merges master. There's no conflicts. Make sure that and he tests locally on his machine. And then once he's convinced that he's not going to be blamed for merging something that could break the build, then he accedes to approve the PR, and it gets merged into master. Now, typically, Jenkins would be notified that oops, something has been merged into master, and that we should kick off a build, and you go fetch and check out the master branch, run the tests locally, and if everything is good, then accede to let the package this and make it into production. Now, we have a fairly simple pipeline, right? Usually in larger organizations, you might have multiple machines where you don't directly go to production, right? Instead, you go to some intermediate machine, such as a QA machine, right? And from QA up, if everything's good with the QA, you can then perhaps promote whatever was deployed to QA, then promote it to a higher level machine, such as staging or performance testing, and then all the way to production. We have a fairly simple pipeline, and we're gonna just keep it that way. So here's a Jenkins file. It's simple Jenkins file, so there's nothing peculiar about this Jenkins file. It's just doing a PWD. So it's doing a remote PWD on the remote machine. They're doing also an LS. We can see what the content of that machine is, and just running this stored in a remote Jenkins file, and it's going to be downloaded. And right now it lives in one of my repositories. Has been checked into the source control, just like any source file, just like any other source file. And source control, we maintain it. Any changes are merged in and accepted by the team, right? In this case, now to configure it, we need to say that this is no longer a script that we're going to copy and paste in the Jenkins configuration. Instead, we're going to tell it to go fetch it from the source control. And we need to say whether we want to use Git or Subversion. There's plugins to support other source control providers. Here we're also saying that we're providing the URL of the GitHub repository, and from which branch do we want to build? Which one do we want to retrieve the code here? Now this will work if the branch is public, which most of our branches are not public, right? So this technique won't work with branches from CCIS. This will only work with the public. This one, once we've configured that, we can either kick off the build ourselves manually, which will go fetch the Jenkins from the remote GitHub and run it. Or we can automate it. We can say, well, I don't want to run this manually. Instead, we can run it, configure so that it can run periodically, every half hour, every hour, every day. We could have it poll. We can say, hey, go out to the repository and check to see if there were any changes. If there were any changes, then kick off a build, right? And notify me if something goes wrong. Right? Again, we're automating all this boring stuff. Or better yet, we can have GitHub notify Jenkins. We can say, hey, if there's any new check-ins or merges into a particular branch, we can have GitHub go and notify Jenkins, and Jenkins can then kick off a build, go fetch the information from GitHub, and then build on the Jenkins machine. Here's just an example of running a Jenkins file from GitHub. So it's going out to a particular repository with that URL. It's configuring as a remote origin, and then doing a checkout on a particular on the latest commit, right? If this had, now notice that the commands are pretty stupid, pretty dumb, right? We're just doing a hello world, pwd, and an ls. So these are things that you could have typed at the command line. If this were a Maven clean install, right, command, it would have gone and downloaded all the Maven jar files and compiled this locally and packaged it for deployment.